The year was 2847, and humanity had finally earned its place among the stars. After centuries of slow expansion through the galaxy, Earth had applied to join the Galactic Assembly. This was a coalition of 47 alien species who had been traveling through space for thousands of years. To them, humans were nothing special. They were physically average, not too strong, not too fast. Their technology was good, but nothing amazing. And they had no experience with galactic politics. Ambassador Lisa Monroe stood at the podium in the great assembly hall on Station Nexus Prime. She was a calm woman in her late 50s with silver hair and steady gray eyes. She had spent 30 years as a diplomat on Earth before taking this job. She knew how to read a room, and right now, this room was not friendly. "We come in peace," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Humanity seeks only cooperation, trade, and friendship with all member species. We have much to offer and much to learn." The assembly hall was enormous. Hundreds of alien delegates sat in floating platforms arranged in a great circle. Some had scales, some had fur, some had no bodies at all and existed as clouds of living gas. They all watched the human woman with varying degrees of interest, amusement, or contempt in the shadows of the upper gallery. High Prelate Varath of the Kethrani Dominion watched with cold eyes. The Kethrani were an ancient reptilian species. They stood 7 feet tall, covered in dark green scales, with 6 eyes arranged in a circle around their heads. They had dominated this sector of the galaxy for over 10,000 years, and they did not like newcomers. "Look at her," Vorath hissed to his aide, a younger Kethrani named Sethik. "So confident, so hopeful. These soft-skinned creatures actually believe they belong here among us." "They are weak, High Prelate," Sethik agreed. "Their bodies are fragile. Their ships are slow. They have no natural weapons, no claws, no venom. How did they even survive on their homeworld?" Vorath made a sound that passed for laughter among his kind. "They are prey animals who somehow learned to build machines. Nothing more. They will learn their place soon enough. If they do not, we will teach them." What Vorath did not understand was that he had already made his first mistake. He had looked at humans and seen only what was on the surface. He had not bothered to learn their history. If he had, he would have known that humans had spent their entire existence learning to survive. Their planet, Earth, was what galactic scientists called a Class 12 death world. It had extreme temperatures, constant natural disasters, thousands of poisonous plants and animals, and diseases that could kill in hours. Most intelligent species evolved on calm, stable worlds. Humans had evolved on a planet that tried to murder them every single day, and they had won. 3 months after humanity joined the assembly, Commander Jake Harris received a distress call aboard his exploration vessel, the Horizon's Edge. Jake was a stocky man with short brown hair and a face that showed his 22 years in deep space. He had seen a lot of strange things out in the black, but the message coming through his communication system made his blood run cold. "Commander, we have a priority signal from the colony on New Providence," reported Lieutenant Amy Foster. She was young, just 25, but she was the best communications officer Jake had ever worked with. Right now, her face was pale. "They are requesting immediate assistance. They say they are under attack." New Providence was a small farming colony on the frontier. Jake had visited there 3 years ago. He remembered green fields, simple houses, and friendly people who had left Earth to build a new life among the stars. He remembered the children who had asked him questions about his ship, the old couple who had given him fresh bread from their oven. "Who is attacking them?" Jake asked. Amy's hands were shaking as she worked her console. "The signal says, Kethrani warships, sir. 3 of them. They are bombing the colony from orbit." Jake felt something cold settle in his chest. The Kethrani were members of the Assembly. This was not a pirate raid or a misunderstanding. This was an act of war against fellow Assembly members. "Get me a line to Earth Command right now," Jake said. His voice was quiet, that everyone on the bridge heard the steel underneath. "And set course for New Providence. Maximum speed. Push the engines past their limits if you have to." The Horizon's Edge was not a warship. It was an exploration vessel with light weapons meant for defending against asteroids and small pirates. It had no chance against 3 Kethrani military ships. Jake knew this. His crew knew this. Nobody suggested they not go. The journey took 6 hours at maximum burn. 6 hours of silence on the bridge, everyone watching their screens and hoping they would arrive in time to help. 6 hours of Jake Harris sitting in his command chair, thinking about the people he had met on New Providence, wondering if they were still alive when they finally dropped out of faster-than-light travel above New Providence. Jake understood immediately that they were too late. The colony was gone. Where the main settlement had stood, there was now only a massive crater still glowing with heat. The fields were burned. The houses were ash. The school where the children had studied was nothing but a dark stain on the scorched earth. 3 Kethrani warships hung in orbit above the devastation, their weapons still powered. They looked like massive serpents made of metal, covered in spines and gun ports. They were beautiful in a terrible way, designed by a species that had spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of destruction. Survivors? Jake asked. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. Flat and empty. Science Officer Danny Park ran his scans with trembling hands. "I am reading approximately 2,000 life signs in the northern mountains. They must have made it to the emergency shelters before the bombardment. 2,000 survivors. Out of 12,000 colonists. 10,000 men, women, and children reduced to ash in a matter of hours. Families who had done nothing wrong except exist in a place the Kethrani wanted." "Sir," Amy said, her voice cracking, "the Kethrani flagship is hailing us." Jake nodded slowly. "Put them on screen." The main viewer flickered, and the face of a Kethrani captain appeared. His scales were dark red, marking him as high-born among his kind. His 6 eyes looked at Jake with obvious contempt, the way a predator might look at something too small to be worth eating. "Human vessel," the Kethrani said. "You will leave this system immediately. This world now belongs to the Dominion. The previous occupants have been removed." Jake stared at the alien for a long moment. He thought about the old couple and their bread. He thought about the children and their questions. He thought about 10,000 people who would never go home again. "Removed," Jake repeated softly. "Yes, the Dominion has decided that humans are not fit to hold territory in this sector. You may collect the surviving refugees if you wish, but you will not return. Do you understand?" Jake Harris had spent 22 years learning to control his emotions. He had faced pirates and smugglers, and once talked a desperate man out of killing himself in a cargo bay. He had never felt what he felt now. It was not anger. Anger was too small a word. This was something deeper, something that came from a very old place inside him. "I understand completely," Jake said, his voice steady and cold. "We will be back." He cut the transmission before the Kethrani could respond. "Amy," he said, "send everything we have recorded to Earth Command. All sensor data, all communications, all footage of what they did here. Priority 1 transmission." "Yes, sir." "Anything else?" Jake turned to look at the burning world below. His hands were shaking, but his voice was calm. "Tell them the Kethrani just made the worst mistake of their very long history. And tell them humanity remembers its dead." The news reached Earth within hours. It spread across every screen, every network, every communication channel on the planet. 10,000 dead. A colony destroyed. Families burned to nothing by alien warships while the Galactic Assembly watched and did nothing. Admiral Kate Sullivan sat in her office in Geneva, watching the emergency session of the United Earth Parliament. She was 63 years old, with iron gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen too much. She had served through the resource wars of the 2600s, when humanity had almost destroyed itself fighting over the last scraps of a dying Earth. She had watched millions die in those wars. She had sworn it would never happen again. Now aliens had murdered 10,000 of her people, and she felt something old and dangerous waking up inside her. On the Parliament floor, representatives were shouting over each other. Some demanded immediate military action. Others called for calm, for diplomacy, for patience. A few even suggested surrender. The Kethrani had dominated their region of space for 10,000 years, they argued. What chance did humanity have against such an ancient power? Kate turned off the broadcast. She had heard enough. She pulled up her console and began writing orders. Every ship in the Earth Defense Force would be mobilized. Every factory would switch to war production. Every engineer, every scientist, every soldier would be called to service. Humanity had spent centuries building a fleet to explore the stars. Now that fleet would have a different purpose, but Kate was smart enough to know that a direct fight would not work. The Kethrani had more ships, more experience, more resources. If humanity tried to match them in a straight battle, humanity would lose dot, so they would not fight straight. Humans had spent their entire history fighting each other. They had developed weapons and tactics that no peaceful species had ever needed to imagine. They knew how to fight dirty, how to use tricks and traps, how to turn weakness into strength. The Kethrani thought humans were prey animals, who had learned to build machines. They were about to discover their mistake. Meanwhile, on Station Nexus Prime, Ambassador Lisa Monroe stood before the Galactic Assembly and demanded justice. "The Kethrani have committed genocide," she said, her voice ringing through the great hall. "They murdered 10,000 innocent civilians, including women and children, without warning or provocation. This is a crime against all civilized beings. We demand that the Assembly condemn this atrocity and punish those responsible." High Prelate Vorath rose from his platform, his 6 eyes gleaming with amusement. He was enjoying this. The human woman thought her words meant something. She thought the Assembly would help her. "The human ambassador exaggerates," Vorath said smoothly. The colony in question was located in disputed territory. The Dominion was simply exercising its legitimate rights. If some humans were inconvenienced in the process, that is regrettable, but hardly unusual. Lisa felt her hands tighten into fists. Inconvenienced? You burned 10,000 people alive. Casualties occur in territorial disputes. Perhaps if humanity had been more careful about where they built their settlements, this could have been avoided. The Dominion is not responsible for human carelessness. Several other delegations murmured in agreement. Lisa looked around the hall and saw the truth clearly for the first time. The Assembly did not care about human lives. The Kethrani had powerful allies, and many species feared their anger. Nobody wanted to risk a war with the Dominion over some dead humans. The vote was quick. The motion to condemn the Kethrani failed by 32 votes to 15. Lisa stood in silence for a moment. The Assembly Hall was vast and ancient, built by species that had been traveling through space while humans were still living in caves. For a moment, she felt very small and very alone. Then she remembered New Providence. She remembered the images from Commander Harris's ship. She remembered what her people looked like after the Kethrani were finished with them. She was not alone. She had 10,000 ghosts standing behind her. Ambassador Monroe called the Assembly Speaker, a crystalline being who served as neutral mediator. These proceedings are not yet concluded. You cannot simply leave. Lisa had already gathered her documents. She paused at the door and turned back to face the hall. Yes, they are concluded, she said. Humanity withdraws from the Galactic Assembly, effective immediately. We have no interest in belonging to an organization that protects murderers. A ripple of shock passed through the delegations. No species had ever voluntarily left the assembly before. You cannot be serious, the speaker said. Without assembly membership, humanity will have no protection, no trade agreements, no diplomatic standing. You will be alone. Lisa smiled, but there was no warmth in it. We have always been alone, speaker. We evolved on a death world, surrounded by things that wanted to kill us. We survived anyway. We do not need your protection. She looked directly at High Prelate Vorath. The Kethrani was no longer amused. Something in the human woman's eyes made him uncomfortable, though he could not say why. You wanted a war, High Prelate, Lisa said quietly. Now, you have one. I suggest you prepare your people, because humanity is coming. And we do not forget. We do not forgive. And we never, ever stop. She walked out of the hall. Behind her, for the first time in recorded history, the Galactic Assembly fell completely silent. Back on Earth, the preparations began immediately. Kate Sullivan worked 20-hour days, coordinating with commanders across human space. Ships were repaired and upgraded. Weapons were manufactured. Soldiers were trained. But more importantly, humanity began to plan. The Kethrani expected a conventional war. They expected human fleets to gather and attack, following predictable patterns. They expected to crush humanity with superior numbers and firepower. Instead, humanity would give them something they had never seen before in the asteroid belts of a dozen colony systems. Construction crews worked around the clock. They hollowed out rocks the size of small moons and filled them with engines, weapons, and life support systems. These asteroid fortresses could hide anywhere, looking like nothing but dead stone until the moment they opened fire in secret labs on Earth and Mars. Scientists developed new weapons based on principles no other species had ever explored. Humanity had spent centuries learning to harness the power of the atom, to manipulate gravity, to build machines that could think for themselves. Now all that knowledge was turned toward a single purpose. On frontier worlds, militia units trained for guerrilla warfare. They learned to hide in jungles and mountains, to ambush enemy patrols, to make occupying human territory as painful as possible. Every man and woman who could hold a weapon volunteered. They remembered New Providence. They remembered the children. 6 months after the massacre, the Kethrani launched their second attack. A fleet of 40 warships descended on the human colony of New Brisbane. Expecting another easy victory, they found an empty world. The colonists had been evacuated weeks before. The orbital stations were abandoned. There was no one to kill. Fleet Commander Zethrak, a veteran of 50 campaigns, clicked his mandibles in satisfaction. The humans have fled without fighting. As expected. They are cowards after all. Begin occupation protocols. His ships descended toward the planet, spreading out to establish control. That was when the asteroids began to move across the system. Hidden fortresses powered up their engines. Concealed weapon ports opened. 200 asteroids, each one armed with railguns and missile batteries and plasma lances, emerged from their hiding places and surrounded the Kethrani fleet. Zethrak had 3 seconds to understand what was happening before the first volley hit his flagship. The Battle of New Brisbane lasted 4 hours. When it was over, 39 Kethrani ships had been destroyed. Only 3 escaped, their commanders screaming warnings to anyone who would listen. The humans were not prey. The humans were not weak. The humans had been preparing for this moment their entire existence. And now, They were coming. The destruction of the Seventh Fleet sent shockwaves through the Kethrani Dominion. For 10,000 years, their military had been undefeated. They had conquered 17 species, crushed countless rebellions, and built an empire that spanned hundreds of star systems. No enemy had ever destroyed an entire fleet dot until now. High Prelate Varath received the news in his palace on Kethra Prime. He listened to the survivors describe the battle, how the asteroids had come alive with weapons, how human ships had appeared from nowhere, how nothing they did seemed to work against these strange tactics. "Impossible," Varath said when they finished. "One fleet lost to primitive mammals? There must be some explanation. Perhaps they had help from another species. Perhaps there was a malfunction in our weapons." "No, High Prelate," said Fleet Commander Zethrak, who had survived only by running faster than his fellow captains. "I saw it myself. The humans did this alone. They planned for months, maybe years. They knew we were coming, and they prepared a trap." Varath was silent for a long moment. He did not like admitting mistakes. He had dismissed humans as weak and unimportant. He had ordered the attack on New Providence, expecting no consequences. Now his finest ships were debris scattered across an alien system. "Then we will send more ships," he said finally. 10 fleets instead of 1. "We will crush these humans with pure numbers." But events did not wait for his plans. Across human space, the war effort was accelerating beyond anything the galaxy had seen before. Humanity had a population of 60 billion people spread across dozens of worlds and stations. When the call went out for volunteers, over 2 billion people answered. Not just soldiers, but engineers, doctors, pilots, technicians, farmers. Everyone wanted to help. Everyone remembered New Providence. Admiral Kate Sullivan coordinated the effort from Earth Command, a massive facility buried beneath the Swiss Alps. She worked constantly, sleeping only a few hours at a time, driving herself beyond normal human limits. Her staff worried about her health, but she refused to slow down. "We have one chance at this," she told her commanders during a strategy meeting. "The Kethrani have more resources than us. If this becomes a long war of attrition, we will lose. We need to hit them hard and fast before they can mobilize their full strength." Captain Rick Torres was one of the commanders at that meeting. He was 34 years old, with dark hair and calm brown eyes that hid a fierce determination. His wife and daughter were still on Earth, and he intended to keep them safe no matter the cost. "What do you need from us?" he asked. Tate pulled up a star map showing Kethrani territory. "The Dominion has 18 major shipyards that produce their warships. Destroy those shipyards, and they cannot replace their losses. They will be forced to defend their homeworld instead of attacking ours. Those shipyards are heavily defended," another commander pointed out. "We would need massive fleets to take them head-on." Kate smiled, and there was something dangerous in that smile. "Who said anything about head-on? We are going to use the same tactics that won New Brisbane. Deception, misdirection, and attacks from directions they never expect." The plan she outlined was brilliant and ruthless. Small strike teams would infiltrate Kethrani space using captured or disguised ships. They would plant weapons on asteroids near each shipyard and wait. Meanwhile, the main human fleet would make obvious attacks on Kethrani border worlds, drawing their defenses away from the real targets. When the moment was right, all 18 shipyards would be hit simultaneously. Rick Torres volunteered to lead one of the strike teams. Kate hesitated, knowing the danger, but eventually agreed. She needed her best people for this mission. 3 months later, Rick and his crew were drifting through an asteroid belt near the Kethrani shipyard at Vexor Station. Their ship, the Silent Runner, was disguised as a mining vessel, broadcasting fake identification codes stolen from captured Kethrani databases. For 6 weeks, They had been slowly positioning themselves, moving their hidden weapons into place, waiting for the signal. The waiting was the hardest part. Rick's crew of 40 people lived in cramped quarters, eating preserved food, rationing water, maintaining absolute communication silence to avoid detection. They could not talk to their families. They could not know what was happening in the rest of the war. They could only trust that the plan was moving forward. Rick thought about his wife, Maria, and his daughter, Sophia. Sophia was 7 years old. She had cried when he left, begging him to stay. He had promised her he would come home. He intended to keep that promise, but he also knew that some promises could not be kept. This mission might kill him. If it did, he wanted his death to mean something. He wanted Sophia to grow up in a galaxy where humans were safe, where no alien power could murder 10,000 people and face no consequences. On the 43rd day, the signal came. Across Kethrani space, strike teams like Rick's received the same coded message. Operation Broken Chain was a go. At precisely the same moment, 18 teams activated their hidden weapons and attacked 18 shipyards. The assault on Vexor Station was chaos and fire. Rick's asteroids opened up with everything they had. Railgun slugs tore through defensive platforms. Missiles spiraled toward the shipyard's reactor cores. Plasma lances cut through the hulls of half-constructed warships. The Kethrani defenders scrambled to respond, but they had no idea where the attack was coming from. Their sensors showed only asteroids, dead rock, nothing dangerous. By the time they figured out the truth, it was too late. The silent runner emerged from hiding and dove toward the station's command center. Rick flew the ship himself, weaving through defensive fire, pushing the engines beyond their limits. Behind him, his gunners targeted every weapon emplacement they could see. A Kethrani missile hit their port engine, and the ship lurched sideways. Warning alarms screamed. Rick fought the controls, keeping them on course by pure determination. Hull breach on Deck 3, reported his first officer, Lieutenant Jenny Blake. We have casualties. Keep moving, Rick ordered. We need to take out that command center or this was all for nothing. They were close now, so close he could see individual Kethrani running across the station's surface. He armed the ship's main weapon, a nuclear device designed to crack open hardened targets. One shot, one chance. He fired. The command center disappeared in a flash of light. Secondary explosions rippled across the station as power conduits overloaded. The shipyard began to break apart, massive sections spinning off into space. All strike teams. Report status, came Admiral Sullivan's voice over the emergency channel. Rick listened as, one by one, the other teams reported in. Shipyard destroyed. Shipyard destroyed. Shipyard destroyed. Not all of them. 3 teams had been killed before completing their missions. 4 more had taken heavy casualties, but 15 of 18 shipyards were gone. The Kethrani had lost more than half their warship production capacity in a single night. Their fleet would begin to shrink while humanity's grew. The balance of the war had shifted. Rick leaned back in his chair, exhausted but alive. His ship was crippled, half his crew was wounded, and they were deep in enemy territory with no clear path home. But they had won. They had struck a blow that the Kethrani would never forget. Set course for the nearest friendly system, he told Jenny. Whatever speed we can manage. We are going home. The silent runner limped through the darkness, one small ship carrying the hopes of humanity. Behind them, the ruins of Vexor Station burned in the cold light of an alien sun. The war entered its 2nd year, and the galaxy watched in growing disbelief. The Kethrani Dominion should have won easily. They had 10,000 years of military experience. They had conquered species far more advanced than humanity. They had numbers, resources, and technology that humans could not match. Every calculation, every prediction said that humanity would be crushed within months, but the calculations were wrong. Humans did not fight like any species the Kethrani had ever encountered. They did not form neat battle lines and exchange fire until one side retreated. They did not follow the ancient rules of civilized warfare that every other species accepted. They fought like something wild and desperate, like creatures who had spent their entire evolution learning to survive against impossible odds, because that was exactly what they were on the occupied world of Horizon's Fall. A Kethrani garrison of 5,000 soldiers faced constant attacks from human resistance fighters. The humans hid in mountains and forests, emerging at night to strike supply convoys and communication centers. They used traps and ambush, turning the planet itself into a weapon. Every step the Kethrani took might trigger an explosion. Every shadow might hide a sniper. Major Paul Bennett led one of the resistance cells. He was 42 years old, a former teacher who had never held a weapon before the war. Now he knew how to build bombs from farming chemicals, how to cut an enemy's throat in silence, how to disappear into the wilderness and strike again from a different direction. They outnumber us 50-1, he told his fighters during a planning session in their hidden cave. They have better weapons, better armor, better everything. But they have one weakness. What is that? Asked a young woman named Carla Dixon, who had lost her entire family in the initial invasion. Paul smiled grimly. They expect us to give up. Every species they have ever fought eventually surrendered when the situation became hopeless. They do not understand that humans do not know how to give up. We would rather die fighting than live as slaves. And that scares them more than any weapon. He was right. The Kethrani commanders on Horizon's Fall sent increasingly desperate reports to their superiors. Their soldiers were exhausted and terrified. They could not sleep because humans might attack at any moment. They could not trust the food or water because humans had learned to poison it. They could not even walk safely because humans had buried explosives under every road. These creatures are insane, one commander wrote. They have no hope of winning, yet they keep fighting. They sacrifice themselves in attacks that accomplish nothing. They refuse to negotiate or surrender. I do not know how to defeat an enemy that does not fear death. Meanwhile, in space, the human fleet continued its campaign of destruction. Admiral Kate Sullivan had reorganized her forces into small, fast squadrons that could strike anywhere and vanish before the enemy could respond. They attacked supply lines, destroyed fuel depots, and ambushed patrol ships. Every week, the Kethrani lost more vessels than they could replace. The Battle of the Nebula crossing showed the galaxy what human commanders were capable of. Kethrani fleet of 80 ships was moving to reinforce their border defenses. They had to pass through a region of dense gas clouds that limited sensor range and slowed travel. It was the only route available, and they expected no trouble. Commander Sarah Mitchell was waiting for them with 12 ships. Sarah was 38 years old, small and quiet, with the kind of face that people immediately forgot. She had been an analyst before the war, studying alien tactics and looking for weaknesses. Now she used that knowledge to design ambush that made Kethrani admirals wake up screaming. Her squadron was hidden inside the gas clouds, their engines cold, and their systems running on minimal power. They were invisible to sensors, just more debris drifting through the nebula. The Kethrani fleet passed within weapons range without detecting them. Sarah gave the signal. 12 ships erupted from hiding and opened fire on the enemy's rear vessels. Missiles and plasma bolts ripped through engines and weapon systems. Before the Kethrani could react, 6 of their ships were crippled. The enemy fleet tried to turn and engage, but the gas clouds made maneuvering difficult. Sarah's ship split into 3 groups and attacked from different directions, never staying in one place long enough to be targeted. They used the clouds as cover, appearing and disappearing like ghosts. When the battle ended, the Kethrani had lost 32 ships. Sarah had lost 2. How is this possible? The surviving Kethrani commanders screamed over the emergency channels. We had 80 ships against 12. This is not how war works. But it was exactly how human war worked. Humanity had spent thousands of years fighting each other, developing tactics that no peaceful species had ever needed. They understood deception, misdirection, and psychological warfare. They knew how to make a small force seem large and a large force seem small. They knew how to turn every disadvantage into an advantage. The Galactic Assembly began to take notice. Species that had ignored the war now watched with growing concern. The Kethrani had always been arrogant neighbors, demanding tribute and threatening violence against anyone who displeased them. Many species had suffered under their dominance but lacked the strength to resist. Now, they saw humanity doing what they had always dreamed of. They saw the mighty Dominion bleeding, losing ships and soldiers, failing to crush these stubborn mammals from a death world. Quietly, secretly, some of them began to help. The Veluxi, a species of insectoid traders, started selling weapons and supplies to human merchants at suspiciously low prices. The Thornery, ancient enemies of the Kethrani, shared intelligence about Dominion fleet movements. Even the Galactic Assembly itself began to fracture, with several member species refusing to support the Kethrani war effort. High Prelate Vorath watched his empire crumble and could not understand what had gone wrong. They are primitives, he insisted to his advisors. Soft-skinned creatures from a single planet. How can they be defeating us? There must be some explanation. Someone must be helping them. Many species are helping them now, admitted his chief advisor. But only because the humans proved they could win. This is our own fault, High Prelate. We underestimated them. We thought destroying one colony would frighten them into submission. Instead, it united them against us. Vorath slammed his clawed hand against the table, leaving deep gouges in the wood. Then we will destroy all their colonies. Every world, every station, every ship. We will wipe them from existence. We no longer have the forces to do that. Our shipyards are gone. Our fleets are scattered. Our soldiers are exhausted. If we continue this war much longer, we will have nothing left to defend ourselves. Vorath refused to listen. He ordered another offensive, throwing his remaining fleets against human defenses in a desperate attempt to turn the tide. The result was catastrophic. Human ambush destroyed half his ships. The rest retreated in disorder. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Kethrani Dominion was losing a war, and humanity was not finished. Not even close. Admiral Sullivan gathered her commanders for the final phase of the campaign. They met aboard her flagship, the carrier Independence, orbiting Earth like a protective guardian. The Kethrani are broken, she told them. Their fleet is a shadow of what it was. Their allies are abandoning them. Their own people are beginning to question why they started this war. She pulled up an image of Kethra Prime, the Dominion homeworld. It is time to end this. We are going to take the war to their doorstep. Not to destroy them, not to commit genocide like they did to us, but to force them to surrender, to make them face consequences for what they did. Rick Torres, who had recovered from his wounds and returned to command, spoke up. They will fight to the death to defend their homeworld. Their entire history is built on being undefeated. Kate nodded. I know. That is why we are going to give them a choice. Surrender unconditionally, or watch everything they have built burn. We will show them exactly what humanity is capable of when we stop holding back. She looked around the room at her commanders. Men and women who had lost friends, family, fellow soldiers. People who had every reason to want revenge, to want the Kathrani wiped from existence the way New Providence had been wiped out. "We are not them," she said quietly. "We will not become monsters to defeat monsters. But we will make them understand that they made a terrible mistake when they attacked our people. They will remember this lesson for the next 10,000 years." The commanders nodded in agreement. They were angry, but they were also disciplined. They would follow orders. They would end this war the right way. "Prepare your ships," Kate ordered. "In 3 days, we move on Kethra Prime." The human fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel in the heart of the Kathrani home system. 300 warships, the largest force humanity had ever assembled, surrounded by clouds of fighters and support vessels. At their center flew the carrier Independence, Admiral Kate Sullivan's flagship. It was the first time in history that an enemy fleet had reached Kethra Prime. The Kathrani had ruled this region of space for 10,000 years. They had conquered 17 species and crushed countless rebellions. Their homeworld was considered untouchable, protected by the greatest military force in the known galaxy. Now human weapons were aimed at their cities. High Prelate Varath watched the human fleet from his palace command center. His scales had gone pale with shock. Around him, his advisors and generals argued in rising panic, suggesting increasingly desperate plans. Some wanted to fight to the last soldier. Others wanted to flee to colony worlds and rebuild. A few whispered about negotiating. "They cannot do this," Varath said, his voice shaking. "We are the Kathrani. We do not lose wars. We do not have enemies at our doorstep. This is impossible." "It is happening regardless of what should be possible," said his chief advisor quietly. "The human fleet outguns our remaining defenses. Our allies have abandoned us. We have no reinforcements coming. If we fight, we will lose, and they will destroy everything." Varath turned on him with fury in his 6 eyes. "Then we destroy them as we die. We take as many of them with us as possible. Future generations will remember our sacrifice. Future generations will remember that you started a war we could not win, killed 10,000 innocent people for no reason, and destroyed our civilization out of pride." The room fell silent. No one had ever spoken to the High Prelate that way. Before Varath could respond, a communication signal came through. Human Admiral Kate Sullivan was broadcasting on all frequencies, demanding to speak with the Kathrani leadership. "Put her through," Varath ordered. He wanted to see the face of his enemy. He wanted to understand how these primitive creatures had brought his empire to its knees. Kate Sullivan's face appeared on the main screen. She was human, older, with gray hair and tired eyes. She looked like someone's grandmother, not the commander of a conquering fleet. But there was steel in her gaze that made Varath uncomfortable. "High Prelate Varath," she said calmly. 18 months ago, your forces attacked the human colony of New Providence. You murdered 10,000 civilians, including women and children, without warning or provocation. You then laughed at our ambassador when she asked for justice. You told the galaxy that humans were too weak to matter. She paused, letting the words sink in. You were wrong. Varath tried to muster his old arrogance. If you have come for revenge, human, then get on with it. Destroy our world as we destroyed yours. We will not beg for mercy. Kate shook her head. We are not you, High Prelate. We did not come here to commit genocide. We came here to end this war and to ensure that nothing like New Providence ever happens again. She outlined her terms. The Kathrani Dominion would surrender unconditionally. Their military would be reduced to defensive forces only. They would pay reparations to humanity and to every species they had ever wronged. Their leaders would face trial for war crimes. And most importantly, they would sign a treaty making genocide the ultimate crime under galactic law, punishable by the total destruction of any species that attempted it. You have 1 hour to accept these terms, Kate finished. If you refuse, we will demonstrate what happens when humanity stops being merciful. We will destroy your orbital platforms, your military installations, and your ability to ever threaten another species again. We will leave your civilian population alive, but you will spend the next century rebuilding from nothing. The transmission ended. Vareth stared at the blank screen, his mind racing. Part of him wanted to refuse out of pure pride. The Kethrani had never surrendered in 10,000 years. To do so now would shame his ancestors and everything his species had built, but another part of him looked at the human fleet, hanging in his sky, and felt something he had never experienced. The fear these humans had come from a death world, a planet that should have killed them 1,000,000 times over. They had evolved surrounded by predators and diseases and natural disasters. They had fought each other constantly, perfecting the art of war until it was burned into their very genes. And when someone threatened their children, they did not stop. They did not negotiate. They did not give up. They kept coming until their enemy was destroyed or until they were all dead. Vareth finally understood what he had awakened when he ordered the attack on New Providence. He had not angered a weak species of prey animals. He had poked a sleeping monster that had spent its entire existence learning to survive and to win. "Accept their terms," he said quietly. His generals stared at him in shock. "High Prelate, we cannot simply surrender. Our honor demands." "Our honor is already gone," Vareth interrupted. "I destroyed it when I ordered the attack on that colony. I was arrogant and foolish, and now our people must pay the price. But they do not have to die for my mistakes." He looked at the human fleet one more time. "Accept their terms. End this war. And pray that our descendants forgive us for what we have done." The surrender ceremony took place 6 months later in the rebuilt assembly hall on Station Nexus Prime. Representatives from every species in the galaxy watched as High Prelate Vareth signed the treaty that ended his empire. Ambassador Lisa Monroe represented humanity. She had aged during the war, her hair now completely white, her face lined with grief and exhaustion. But she stood straight and proud as she accepted the Kethrani surrender. "Let this be a lesson to the galaxy," she said, addressing the assembled delegations. "Humanity does not seek war. We do not desire conquest. We ask only to live in peace with our neighbors and to be treated with the same respect we offer to others." She paused and looked directly at Vareth. "But if you threaten our people, if you harm our children, if you mistake our preference for peace as weakness, then you will see a different side of humanity. You will see what we become when we are angry." Her voice hardened. "You will not like what you find." The treaty was signed. The war was over. Humanity had won. In the years that followed, things changed across the galaxy. The Kethrani Dominion was dissolved, replaced by a democratic federation that renounced war and conquest. Other species that had bullied their neighbors suddenly became much more careful about how they treated others. The galaxy was still dangerous, but it was a little bit safer. Humanity settled back into their preferred role as explorers and traders, spreading slowly across the stars and making friends with species who treated them fairly. They built new colonies and new stations. They raised new generations of children who had never known war, but they never forgot. On New Providence, now a memorial world, a monument stood at the center of the original colony site. It listed the names of all 10,000 people who had died there. Every year, humans from across the galaxy came to pay their respects and to remember. 20 years after the war ended, a young Kethrani student visited the memorial as part of an exchange program. She stood before the wall of names, reading them one by one, trying to understand what her ancestors had done. "I am sorry," she said quietly, though there was no one to hear. I am so sorry for what we did to you." She did not expect a response, but an old human man sitting on a nearby bench heard her words and walked over. His name was Rick Torres. He was 74 years old now, retired, his dark hair turned to silver. His wife had died 5 years earlier. His daughter had children of her own. He had come here, as he did every year, to remember the war and the friends he had lost. "You have nothing to apologize for," he told the young Kethrani. "You were not born when this happened. The sins of your ancestors are not your sins." "But how can you say that?" she asked, her 6 eyes wide with confusion. "My people murdered your people. You should hate us." Rick was quiet for a moment, looking at the wall of names. He thought about the war, about the battles and the blood, about the anger that had burned in him for so long. Then he shook his head. "Hatred is a poison," he said. "If we held on to it forever, we would destroy ourselves. Your people did a terrible thing, but you have also changed. You have become better. That is what matters." He looked at her with eyes that had seen too much, but had not become hard. Humans do not forget. We remember New Providence, and we always will. That memory keeps us prepared, keeps us vigilant, keeps us from ever being caught helpless again. But remembering is not the same as hating. We fought your ancestors because we had to. Now we hope to be friends with you because we choose to." The young Kethrani thought about his words for a long time. Finally, she bowed her head in the human gesture of respect that she had learned. "Thank you," she said. "I will try to be worthy of that friendship." Rick Torres smiled, the first real smile he had felt in years. "That is all anyone can do," he said. "That is all any of us can do." They stood together before the memorial as the sun set over New Providence, 2 people from species that had once tried to destroy each other. Behind them, the wall of names glowed softly in the fading light, a reminder of what had been lost and what had been gained. Humanity had won its war. But more importantly, humanity had not lost its soul.